Hello and welcome. I'm Jay,
I'm Robbie.
and you join us for episode 3 of Generations Apart, the podcast where we chat about gaming and technology across generations, from retro to next gen, sharing our perspectives on the past and our excitement for the future. On today's episode, we're changing our approach from recent episodes and doing something a little more nostalgic, specifically looking at the video games that shaped us as we explore the difference in our gaming memories as we grew up console generations apart. Before we get into that, though, Robbie, what piqued your interest this week?
So this week, I know you're a big Apple fan, and although recently converted to iPhone, was traditionally an Android fan. So I'm going to be representing Android today. And last week, Samsung had their keynote where they released their three new phones, the S23 line. So what piqued my interest this week is the new phones, I'll bring them up on the screen now so you can see what they look like. They look very similar to last year, just slightly different. I think it's a bit of an iterative upgrade. But the thing I thought was really interesting, so they've brought out three models. There's the S23, which is like the normal size, like the smaller phone. S23 Plus, which is the bigger size of that, and then the S23 Ultra, which is their flagship top tier version of their phone, which let's try and find it there. Okay, here we got some features. So, bunch of different colors, and it comes with the S Pen. So they've discontinued the Galaxy Note series a few years ago. So it's now only the Ultra series that has the S Pen, which is the little stylus that comes with the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest thing I think that's changed is the camera. It's now got a 200 megapixel sensor in the S20 Ultra, S23 Ultra, sorry. And I thought it would be interesting to get your comments on it as a keen photographer, Jay, on the pixel competition between phones.
I think the pixel competition became irrelevant a long time ago when it came to competing. We got to a certain point, didn't we, where that pixel count really has become irrelevant. Once you get over a certain number, I don't know, are you really adding any value? I think it's the different cameras and the lenses that they're now putting into these things. And I can see from what you're sharing on screen for those who are watching on video that it looks like it's got quite a few lenses. Or is it? Oh, hang on. What are those?
So there's
So three
four
lenses,
lenses.
four lenses, and then what was one of those flash?
I think one of them is a
I assume.
laser. It's a
A
laser.
laser?
Yeah, yeah, for really snappy
Oh, okay.
autofocus.
Right. Okay. Nice.
Yeah. So lots of
I mean,
different kind of
that
cameras.
that
It
is
looks
that is
ridiculous.
impressive. I'm not. I don't follow the Android devices, and I'm not up with what the latest Samsung devices are. What strikes me is the complete lack of creativity in terms of naming conventions between. I don't know. I'm not saying that that's Samsung copying Apple or vice versa. I don't know which did Plus first. Where who's doing Pro and who's doing Ultra, but the just the distinct lack of originality between the two companies in how they're naming their phones. I guess it keeps it simple for you to do your comparisons, but that does strike me as being a little bit naff naming wise. And the S23, is that it? What's the naming conventions that Samsung have done then? Is it
Just after the year.
S20? Oh, it's literally the year. Well,
Hmm.
I suppose that's easy to remember.
Yeah, that's
I
the
would
thing is that
credit that because I have a nightmare trying to place iPhones in my
yeah,
head when it comes to what year they came out.
unless you know exactly what you're looking for. Um, yeah, it
Especially
definitely
for a long
helps.
time, they screwed everybody over with their point 0.5 iterations in their naming convention. So it would be the iPhone, then it was the iPhone 3G. So there's no two. Then it was the iPhone 3GS, and then the 4, and then the 4S, and then the 5, and the 5. It just went on. So I guess at least that's easy to remember. I'm sure they're brilliant. I mean, I'm to be honest, who wants a stylus for their mobile phone these days?
So
We've got
I
Apple Pencils and I guess pencils for large tablets, but for a phone,
I
do you
just
need
moved
one?
away from my previous phone was the Samsung Galaxy S, the Note 20 Ultra. Very long name, but that had a
Oh,
stylus on it. I actually found it really useful. More useful for things like if you play Jackbox games like Drawful or anything that you need to kind of draw
Yeah.
things on your screen, but also screenshots. Like, the snipping tool that you get on PC, you have like a version of that with the stylus where you can just
Oh, nice.
grab a small piece of the screen. Or you could even do something similar, and you grab a small bit of text, like it recognizes the text that you're hovering over, and then you can copy that out. And so it is really useful. It got some really cool features in there. Um, it's one of these things. It's a bit like Marmite. You're either a pen user or you're not. I think a lot of people will buy this and just never use the pen. I know people who've done that.
I mean, I have the Apple Pencil on my iPad, and I love it. I use it sparingly because I'm not an artist, particularly I'm a wannabe artist, and I don't write a lot. But when I do use it, I do like the experience. So if it works and the screen estate is big enough and it's implemented well, then fair play. I mean, as you said, Apple fanboy, well and truly embedded with my Apple ecosystem, and I accept that from a hardware innovation perspective, Apple aren't exactly pushing the boundaries at the moment, and this is maybe for another episode for us to talk about mobile tech. But I think I'll be honest, it not only did it not pique my interest, it completely passed me by. I had no idea that it had even happened. So it's news to me that they had a keynote and they've launched a new device. That's how far removed I am from sort of like the competition in mobile tech. I only really care when the Apple conference comes around, and everything else genuinely, without even realizing it, just passes me by. But it does look cool. It does look cool, and it's nice to see. It's nice to see new hardware and new ideas because ultimately they push each other, don't they? Apple does
They
something,
compete with each other, yeah, and then
follows.
push them to
Samsung
innovate.
does something, Apple try and follow. So yeah, whatever they're doing now, that laser focus. I mean, I remember my digital cameras of old back in the day having like proper laser for autofocus, and the
Yeah.
quality and the way that would work, especially in low light, was superb. So I would love to see that come to the iPhone.
Mm,
And I'm on the iPhone 12 Pro, so I'm a couple of generations behind. My other half's got the 14 Pro. The
that's what
lens
I've just got.
sizes are significantly different. Yeah, so you'll notice the lens sizes are radically different on the back, and that's what a lot of your picture quality comes down to, is the size of the glass.
Yeah.
Same for photography. They always say, don't they, the size of the lens, the size of the glass is it's the amount of light you can let in at the sort of at the speed of the shutter. So the 14 does take much nicer pictures in general than my 12, noticeably so, and especially in low light. The low light pictures are really, really quite good. So I'm all up for it. Keep pushing the boundaries. Like
That's
you
the
said,
thing that a lot of them are focusing on, is the low light performance these days, just because it's the hardest thing to tackle on mobile phone
yeah,
hardware. But similar to iPhone, because it's 200 megapixels, an iPhone, the iPhone 14 Pro, I think, is 48 megapixels, I
yeah,
think.
megapixels. Yeah,
And they do this thing where they bin down.
that's only in one specific mode as well. It's not
Yeah. Well, the reason
48
they have that
every picture, every mode. Yeah,
is because they take the 4 pixels in the iPhone, at least, and just get the best light out of all the four, and then bin it down to 12 megapixel, like 12 megapixel pictures, but with better light. So it gives you amazing low light performance. You can do like a pro mode where you get the 48 megapixel raw photos, but they
yeah,
take up loads of room, and they're only really used for if you're going to do any editing on it, really. But
yeah. It's for intensive editing, isn't it? If you want raw files.
yeah, interesting
Yeah.
camera tech though these days.
Yeah, I mean, it's impressive. I think what's interesting though, and I think about my phone, I don't take a lot of pictures. Given that I have been in the past an enthusiast for photography and videography, I use my camera sparingly on my device. Laura uses it much more than I do. That's my other half. But uh, I think for me, what's interesting is loads of innovation on the rear-facing cameras, and I would have said the opposite to this 10 or 15 years ago, but the front cameras not getting as much love, and in
Mm,
fact, if anything, they're trying to hide them, obviously, and you've got the floating island now on the iPhone or whatever they've called it,
the
um,
dynamic island.
dynamic island. That's it. But then I think, well, actually, certainly with my kids at least, it's sometimes easier to get them to pose for a picture if you're using the selfie camera,
Mm,
because they can see the preview of themselves and they kind of know what's going on, and they see it, and then you go smile and they react and they get it. Whereas if you kind of try and turn the phone around and guess where you are, it doesn't work as well.
yeah.
So I do wonder if there's going to come a point where someone's going to do something clever, and maybe this has already been done, some sort of like twistable device where the actual lenses are you turn them physically on the device to face the way you want them to face or something like that. Because
Probably for another episode, but there is lots of different innovations around that, which is really
yeah,
interesting.
I feel like that's what I would like to see, something that allows that front-facing camera to keep up, because we use that probably more for most everyday users than the rear camera now. If you're not taking a lot of pictures, think about FaceTime, or the equivalent on other devices. Think about selfies. Think about all the different things that that front camera is doing that the back camera doesn't do.
Mm,
Um, but also the challenge, I guess, there is how do you fit it onto a screen without it becoming obnoxious and obtrusive? Because half the back of the 14 now is basically taken up by lenses. If you've got the normal size one, and
true.
then you've got the fancy tall one. But yeah, interesting though. Interesting. See where it
Well,
goes.
just the last point on that. It's funny you mentioned the front-facing camera. Both the iPhone 14 Pro and the new Samsung here have increased the power of the camera on the front as well. They've both gone 12 megapixel, and they both now can do autofocus. I'm not sure whether Samsung could do autofocus before, but certainly iPhones couldn't on like front-facing. So it was always like a fixed focal point. So you were either in shot or you weren't with the selfie camera. Now it's got autofocus, so they are kind of focused on it a little bit, but yeah, I do agree. Having the camera from the back used as a selfie camera would be way better. Maybe that's the use
100%,
case for folding phones, because you can fold the back camera
yeah,
into the front.
yeah, perhaps. Um, cool. Well, interesting one. I'm going to bring my usual, slightly more grounded, slightly more boring, slightly more connected to previous episodes one. So I've unintentionally picked something that is, I've realised is linked to our previous episode on generative AI, and it's a quick one. Won't take long. If you can just share the article for those
Yeah.
watching the video. So this is reported leaks of screenshots, um, supposedly showing the integration of ChatGPT, OpenAI's generative AI program, into Microsoft's Bing search engine. So we talked about this last week when we talked about generative AI. We talked about how it could power and transform search. Well, it looks like, if you believe these screenshots, potentially either a whoopsie and it got leaked, or maybe some intentional self-promotion here from Microsoft. But it appears ChatGPT has already been integrated into Microsoft's Bing search engine. So Microsoft said nothing about it. Absolutely no confirmation from them that this is true. But the screenshots look pretty legit. There is a moving moving image. How old does that make me sound? It's either a GIF or a video. But there is some screen capture of someone showing, or at least reporting to have used it. And it makes sense because Microsoft, we know, have invested heavily in OpenAI as a company. They are looking to use ChatGPT as part of that. They've talked about using it within things like Teams. So yeah, why wouldn't you integrate that into your search engine? And certainly, it seems to have Google's feathers ruffled. I think we mentioned last time out that Google were reported to be bringing up to 20 AI products out this year. I also noted when I was doing some reading over the weekend, which is kind of linked to this as part of this, is that Google are reportedly going to be releasing the first of their AI tools in the next couple of weeks.
Wow.
That's how fast this stuff is coming. So they are obviously worried about this. Microsoft flexing their muscles a little bit. If this is true, they're just sort of testing the
Maybe a
water.
tactical leak from them, do you think?
Yeah,
Just to freak them out even more.
a little bit of extra pressure on Google. So completely off topic in terms of our nostalgic look back for today's episode, but I just thought I'd share that. And I don't know, Robbie, what are your thoughts? I don't know if it's the first time you've seen that leak.
No, it is. Yeah, I haven't seen this before. And for anyone who's watching this on YouTube, there's a little GIF here of it looks like a tab, where you would select images in the Google search. You select chat, and it brings up a little chat window where you can, it looks like, ask for content or ask questions, and ChatGPT will give you an answer as part of the Bing search, which looks awesome. And I'd heard they were planning the integration, but I hadn't really thought in my mind how it would actually work. But this looks actually quite good. Like,
Or
it could
how
be really
quickly
useful.
you do it.
Well, not just
Yeah.
how quick, but how mechanically they would do it. And this looks really kind of seamless and well thought through. It would be good to try it out. I think maybe that's something we could give it a go on a future podcast or something.
Yeah.
Once it's out, it would be good to
Well,
see.
like I said, you can't find it now because like I said, it's not
Yeah.
there. And whether this proves to be true or not, who knows? It hasn't been denied as of yet. It's only been sort of doing the rounds for a few days. This is the time of recording. It's a Monday. So you won't hear this till Friday, by which time maybe Microsoft will have denied it. But as of recording, this is very much a leak that could well prove to be something very interesting.
Exciting stuff.
There you go. So let's get back to this episode, though, because it's all about nostalgia now. So we've just done a bit of future-facing tech, which kind of flies in the face of the topic. But we're going to get back to a little bit of retro today, and maybe sort of for those of the right age, this will be a trip down memory lane. Hopefully, we'll spark some nostalgia for you along the way. So the context here and the reason why the podcast is called Generations Apart is that despite our looks, in fact, there's a good 10-year age gap between Robbie and myself. And believe it or not, I'm the older one.
All right.
Those, I know. No, I'm joking. So I'm 10 years older than Robbie. That is what it is. I'm a boy born in the 80s. And Robbie, I'm guessing that makes you a boy born in the 90s.
That's right.
And therefore we're talking about what to name the podcast and what would this be all about. And we thought, well, we've grown up technology and gaming console generations apart. You know, what we grew up with will be different based on when we were raised, what was available in our households, what our parents bought, and then what we, as we got older, went on to be able to buy. So we thought that was a fun title to share the perspectives of two different generations, an 80s and a 90s child. And we thought today we would look back on the video games that shaped us and just have a chat between the two of us, because we've not done this. So we don't actually know where this is going to go in terms of what each of our memories were. But we're going to talk about a handful of points. This isn't going to be exhaustive, and we will come back to this topic over and over because it's fun and it's a nice thing to do, to reflect on the things that ultimately made you what you are. So that's the plan for the show. We'll get straight into it in a moment. But Robbie, anything you wanted to add before I intro the first bullet on my little bulleted list that I provided you?
No, it's a good intro. I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to hearing about your generation of gaming.
Old man. Okay, so let's get into it. So we just tried to provide a little bit of structure so that each of us could prepare for this episode. So I'll give you some prompts and we'll talk to them. But Robbie, I think what I'll do is I'll invite you to talk to the prompt first. Otherwise, I'm going to end up talking for the entire episode. So the first prompt that I gave you was your first gaming memory. So tell me about your first gaming memory.
So my first gaming memory, I'm struggling to remember how old I actually was at the time, but must have been very young. I remember playing games with my brother in the living room of our house, the old house, and I must have moved when I was like 4. So it's very young that I was thinking. And it was the Sega Master System. And I remember a couple of games in particular. It must have been my dad's console at the time, I think. But there's a couple of games I remember in particular. There was Spider-Man, and I think it was Spider-Man versus Kingpin. I think it was the game. And I remember that one in particular because it was very challenging. It was back when if you didn't know how to get to the next level, you just had to keep going, or you just replay the game up until the point you get stuck every time. It just felt like very repetitive until one day we did manage to figure out how to get to the next level. And then the other game I remember quite vividly is Paperboy, which is very nostalgic. I think I'll bring that up actually, because I think I've got an images for anyone who remembers this at the time. You're basically just a kid on a bike, and you have to you deliver papers by throwing them at the houses, and you get points if you smash windows and if you hit like people that are on unicycles or whatever that you're going past, and you have little ramps that you jump over. It was a very fun game, but for anyone who's seen it on YouTube, the graphics are a little dated looking back at it now.
I think that will be the theme of the show, though, to be honest, Robbie, is that everything's a little dated that we're going to be talking about. But yeah, Paperboy, I remember. I mean, now you've said it, it's sparking memories, although I couldn't tell you where I played it or why I remember it.
I think it was also an old arcade game, to be fair.
Yeah, it could be. I've definitely played it on some sort of home console, but I'll tell you what, I came and stuck with my own bullet points here. So I was trying to remember myself what my first memory was, and I've got vague memories of what I think was a Spectrum.
Spectrum.
Yeah,
you have to educate me on what that is.
Spectrum. So it was like I think it was the UK equivalent of the Commodore. Like it was the same kind of the time period. It was tape driven, like cassette tape driven. Um, but I don't have any strong memories of it. Like I don't have anything. I can't picture any games on it necessarily. I don't think it was something that I particularly played. Again, it may well have been my dad's console, but my dad was never really into gaming, so I think it might have been something he might have dabbled with, maybe borrowed from a friend, something like that. There you go, Spectrum ZX. I want to say something like that. Um, but I wouldn't call that my first memory because I don't, like I said, I don't really have any vivid memories of playing it. Where my gaming started was the Nintendo Entertainment System and the classic Mario, original Mario Brothers, eventually Mario 2 and 3, classic Mario games. We could go into the whole story around Mario 2 and its origins, but it's been done to death on the internet, so we'll leave it. Um, I also remember from that original console Duck Hunt and the Nintendo Zapper. So I don't know if you ever had a chance to play that, but a light gun game where you effectively you had a limited number of bullets to shoot down a couple of ducks. If you were successful, then this dog, the hunting dog, would collect the ducks and sort of trophy them for you. If you missed, he would laugh and snigger at you and basically take the piss out
I
of you.
have seen this
Um,
before, yeah.
yeah, and they actually added the dog and the duck as a pair into the most recent version of Smash Brothers on the Nintendo Switch. So they're playable characters, and you can now
Nice.
buy them as amiibo, and I've got them on a shelf. I also remember the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles
Oh yeah.
on the Nintendo Entertainment System. That game was tough as balls. It was really hard. Frankly, not that much fun when you revisit it now and look at it. Not that one. I wish it was that one. I think it might be the first screen there, that one, which is this is not great for podcasters, but Robbie's showing some screenshots, doing a bit of Google searching while we're talking. That was the game. Really difficult, but nostalgic and iconic. The music. So I bought a Nintendo recently, and I picked that game up as one of them. Putting it back in and just hearing the music was really nostalgic. So for me, it was the NES. The console that I think I played more of, and we can talk about this later on, was the Super Nintendo. But the NES was my first proper gaming memory. Um, I love that console.
Did they
Albeit next
remaster
level.
this Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? That this one that they remastered?
So they've done. There's a collection on the Switch and on the modern consoles called the Cowabunga Collection, which is a
Yeah.
remaster. Well, not a remastering, but just a collection
Oh,
of
okay.
pretty much every Turtles game going from the Game Boy right through to these consoles. So it's playable on modern consoles. It hasn't been remastered, um, and it's not the source material that is the inspiration for Shredder's Revenge, which is the most recent and an excellent Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, but that's an episode in its own right. I can tell you about what game that was, and it may well come up later on, but I'll hold on that one. Um, in fact, am I going to hold on that one? No, I'm going to tell you about it because why not? No, I'm not. I'm going to hold on it. Stop. It's going to come later on. We'll talk about the Turtles more. The Turtles are a big part of my childhood. So interesting that yours is the Master System, though, because the Master System is as old as the NES.
That's why I'm thinking
So
it must have been my dad's. When did
yeah,
it come out?
it's going to be the early 80s, I'd have thought, mid 80s. So the NES is 85, I think. Or at least my console that I've got here in this room is dated 85. The Master System would have been then or thereabouts, maybe slightly
Uh,
after.
87.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, it would have been. I would have assumed that, and I'm going to use Nintendo as my benchmark for generations because I was more Nintendo than Sega. But I would have thought you would have been N64 as a 90s boy,
I never
maybe
got
late
into
Super
Nintendo.
Nintendo.
I
No,
didn't.
okay.
Nintendo completely passed me. Um,
Wow,
yeah, it was
wow.
all Sega at the time. And
Well,
so
they were.
I must have played when I was
Okay.
like 4 or 5. So that would have been like 99, 98. So at that
Mm.
point, it's almost a 10-year-old console as well, or
Well,
over a
so
10-year-old.
interestingly, I imagine you were probably influenced then by the marketing campaign for the Mega Drive, because if you and I won't go into it now, but if you read the book Console Wars, I think I've recommended it to you before,
Mm.
and you haven't done your homework, but go buy it, read it. It's really good. They talk about the wars in that, and basically, Sega were pitching at a slightly older age group and trying to pull in the cooler kids, air quotes. Um, and it was Sega does what Nintendo don't, was their
Oh,
campaign,
nice.
which I thought was quite good. Um, So yeah, that may I wonder if maybe your household was influenced by Sega's aggressive marketing around the sort of more grown up nature of Sega and
Maybe.
Sonic the Hedgehog, perhaps, but one to explore. Um, so yeah, but really interesting that Master System was your first. It's actually the one console from that sort of Nintendo and Sega generation or their life cycle that I've never owned.
Mm,
And even in my recent, and again, this is for another podcast, but my search to rebuy all my retro stuff from my youth, the Master System I haven't procured. It's the one thing I haven't bought because as a kid I never had it. I had
yeah.
a friend who had one, but I couldn't even tell you what games he had. And we played it together sparingly.
The thing
Uh,
I always remember as well about the Master System, and I hesitate to mention it because I literally can't find any evidence of this actually being a thing, so I could very well have made it up, is I remember it being embedded in like this little desk, this like kid-sized desk, and the controllers were embedded in it as well. It was like made out of really thin plastic, to be fair. Um, but
really?
yeah, I remember. And then the controllers were like kind of just they had little placeholders where the controllers would sit in this little kind of desk thing. I
Yeah,
do
I've
remember
never
it, but I
heard that.
can't find it anywhere online. So
Yeah,
you just have
I
to take my
trust you.
word.
It's not like I said, it's not a console I have any memories of, and I've not sort of chased down or looked into, so it would have passed me by. I was Mega Drive, but it was my secondary console.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, that brings us neatly on to talking point number two. So after your first gaming memory, I asked you to think about the first console that you had or owned. So I'd say now Master System was presumably, as you said, you think your dad's.
Yeah.
So I guess here we were looking for the first console that was yours, whether you bought it as an older child or adult, or whether you were gifted it as
Mm.
a child. So what was the first console that you remember owning?
That was PlayStation 1 was the first one I always remember.
Oh, a bit of a jump then.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I remember the PlayStation 1 very well. Still, it gives me nostalgia now if I listen to the intro music when you put in the game.
Classic.
Fantastic console. But I remember the games I used to play. I used to play a lot with my brother. We used to play Micro Machines. I don't know if you remember that one. It was a great little game where you had tiny little cars racing around on like pool tables and
I do
uh,
remember it, but I think I remember it before you played it on the PlayStation
yeah,
because
it was
I had that on the
V3.
Mega Drive. Yeah, I had it on the Mega Drive, and it was yeah much more primitive. In fact, the cartridge on the Mega Drive came with extra controller ports on it. Like how
Wow.
bonkers is that? Yeah. So obviously the console was only a two-port console, and the cartridge had two additional controller slots built into what was a
Yeah.
larger cartridge. So you literally would dock that Micro Machines game, plug your players 3 and 4 into that, and you could have a four-player game on it. But it's mad now to think that your game came bundled with the hardware to enable multiplayer.
I always thought that was weird when games came with hardware. It's like because I used to play Time Crisis on there as well, and I had the light gun, um, which is bizarre. Just getting like hardware mixed with the games at the time. I always thought that was kind of odd. Um, but I always used to collect all these extra little things like the extenders. Did you ever have that for the PlayStation as well, where you extend how many controllers you have in? So you take up one slot for the little controller, and then it extends
Yeah.
to you can have like an extra three people on. Um,
Yeah, wasn't the one on the PlayStation kind of like an L shape and it was
yeah,
designed to
that's
slot
exactly
around
the
the
one I remember.
console?
Yeah.
Yeah, whereas the PS2 one was like a weird block, which kind of just dangled out the front of the machine and was meant to look a little bit like the PS2 in its form factor. I've got the PS2 one here somewhere. I don't have the PS1. What was the actual name for the multi-tap? Was it multi-tap?
Oh, I don't
I want
remember.
to say multi-tap. I think it was called a multi-tap. I do remember it though. I also have. You're gonna love coming here up when we do a couple of these together in person because I've got the gun and I've got Time Crisis One, um,
I love
two,
that.
three, and four as
Because
well.
you
So
need a
you can play it on
CRT
the
TV
PlayStation.
as well, don't you? You can't do it on like
Have
LCD
you
screens.
do, which is why I bought the CR. I'll have to go through. We'll have to do an episode where I will go through some of the weird retro stuff that I've sort of started collecting. I'm by no means on the level of some of these people you see on YouTube who've got fantastic, like massive collections. But I've got a fairly well established set of things here that I remember fondly, and the Gun Con, I think it was called, and Time
Yeah,
Crisis One
I love
is
Time
definitely one of
Crisis.
them. What else do you remember on your PS1 then?
PS1, I remember GTA, the original GTA,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
top down.
top down.
Yeah, yeah. So I've got my Steam Deck at the moment.
Yeah,
So I've got my like handheld game, and you can get all the retro games on there as well. So I downloaded GTA 1 to see what it was like. It doesn't really hold up, but it's there for nostalgia purposes at least.
I was going to say exactly that. I was going to say it doesn't really hold up. I recently bought the GTA Collector's Edition on PS1, secondhand, obviously,
Yeah.
and it's got GTA, GTA 2, and GTA London. Was it?
London, yeah. I actually remember
London.
that one. I think I had that one
Mm.
as well.
I put them in to play them, and they do not hold up.
Yeah. You can hear
I
like
remember them being novelty.
the
I,
recycled samples, the audio samples you can hear all over the
yeah.
place as well. Yeah.
I do remember it being fun, but I don't remember it being very good as a kid either. Like I remember it being a bit. It was the novelty value and the ability to run someone over as like a young boy. It was like, oh, blood, or
Yeah.
it felt naughty and therefore kind of cool.
Yeah.
But in reality, it wasn't. Even then, it wasn't a great game.
Yeah. I played it a lot
GTA changed things.
for the Easter eggs. You got a lot of Easter eggs, I think, in those kind of games where they would hide things in the maps and you had to go and find them, or you'd buy like a book at a local like magazine shop, and it'll give you
Yeah,
like a playthrough thing where you can find all the hidden gems in the game.
yeah, I think there's some fantastic games on the PS1, to be honest.
Mm.
Again, we could spend, and I think we will do some sort of episodes where we'll deep dive a console and really get into some of the catalog and what we remember. But yeah, PS1, cracking console.
The
Any other
other
games that stand out?
the other major game for me and my brother at least was Tony Hawk's. Was a big player of that one.
Yeah, yeah. I was never really into Tony Hawk's. Was that on PS1?
I believe so. Be the first
Yeah,
one, wasn't
maybe it
it?
would have been late, wouldn't it? Yeah, because I know there was a lot of them on PS2.
There was.
Um, but yeah, maybe the first one was PS1. My memory's not great for that stuff, to be honest. I'll
Yeah,
absolutely
it
take
was.
your
In
word.
fact, it went all the way up to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, it looks like, from what I'm searching here.
On the PS1?
Actually, 4. Yeah. I think so.
No,
Yeah, yeah. So,
really?
yeah. So PS2, I think, was when you start to have like Underground and Underground 2,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
American Wasteland as well. Um,
And then it got a bit of shit, didn't
Underground 2 is
it?
possibly the best Tony Hawk's game. That or Pro Skater 3. God, great game.
Did you ever play the remasters of 1 and 2 where they combine them
Yeah.
into one game on the PS4?
I know. I've got the remastered on the PC though, and I think
That'd
it's
be the
one.
same thing.
I
Yeah.
think it's 1, 2. Oh, is it one? Only 1 and 2? I thought it might have been 3 as well. I
There's
haven't
one, I
played it
think
all the
it's
way
the 1
through
and
yet.
2, isn't it?
Yeah, great
I'll
games.
be honest, I was never really into Tony Hawk's. I dabbled with a friend who had them, but it was never really my kind of title. But I know they're very popular.
Yeah, caused many a
So
fight between me and my brother, of course.
didn't all consoles, wasn't that kind of the point? Like,
It's true.
I don't want to play that, I want to play something else. Or Christmas Day was always really awkward when you'd get a game each, and my
Yeah.
brother would get like a football game. I remember one year, I think he got some sort of International Superstar Soccer or whatever the title was at the time, and I got Killer Instinct. And it was one of those, well, it can only be in, you could play it for a little bit, and you can take it out, so your brother can play it, and then he play it for a little bit, and he had to turn it off and take it out, so you can put yours back in, and you had to basically take it in turns to play the console together, and neither one of us wanted to play the other one's game, but would play it with them until we could then have the console back,
Yeah.
put our own thing back in. But memories. Which brings me on to actually, as I'm thinking of those games. So my first console, I said the NES was the first console in the house, but it wasn't. I don't know if it was necessarily bought specifically for us.
Mm.
Me and my brother, I've got a younger brother. This Super Nintendo was our console. That was bought for us, I believe, and I think it was a Christmas gift. I think it came with Mario All Stars. Now, it's very important when you're googling this, for anyone watching, that you pick the PAL version of the Super NES, because if you choose the American one, it looks like a fundamentally different device.
Oh yeah.
And the controllers looked the same, but ours had colourful buttons, and the Americans had purple, two shades of purple. I mean, so much better. Look at that, so much better. Anyway, sorry, that's not podcast friendly. So the Super Nintendo was my first console. We had Super Mario World. I think we also had later in the life the Mario All Stars,
Mm.
which was a remix of the original Mario games with modern graphics, or modern then. The Super Nintendo we played to death. I don't think we had loads of games on it because games were expensive then, but we had more than probably our fair share as kids growing up. We were very lucky. We had, I remember the wrestling games distinctly. My brother and I would put a lot of time into the WWF games. We were
I
both
used
big
to
into
love
our
them.
wrestling. Yeah. Royal Rumble, I think, was the one we played the most. And we
Oh,
got
of
to a point
course.
where in the Royal Rumbles, we could literally, we gamed the system where a wrestler would come in and my brother would grab them one side, fling them to the other side, and then I would turf them straight out. And we could do that back and forth over and over, and we managed to clear an entire rumble without dropping the ball once. That was quite good fun. We had Mario Kart, of course.
Oh,
The
nice.
entry to the Mario Kart genre was the original Mario Kart on the SNES. We played that to death. Absolutely adored that game. And that console used to come with us. So, we would go to our grandparents' house. They lived quite far away. So we'd go for like, a full day or a weekend, and we would take the consoles with us. And I just remember us, hooking that up and sitting on the floor in front of the spare TV in the living room, playing that, while the olds watched the Saturday night TV. And yeah, just really fond memories of that console. So many games, too many to mention really, but like I said, the Mario games were classics. Killer Instinct, big one for me. Loved that game. Played a lot of that.
Don't think I've
To
ever
come
heard of
back
that
to the
one.
Turtles, Killer Instinct. You've
Mm.
never heard of Killer Instinct? Oh my goodness. Killer Instinct was an arcade game that was ported to the SNES, and then it had an N64 sequel, which wasn't as good, in my opinion. And then I think they did a relaunch of it on the Xbox One, which was really quite good. It was all about combos. Kind of took it was like it kind of took bits of Street Fighter, bits of Mortal Kombat, both great games on the SNES, by the way,
Mm.
and smashed them together. So you had like kind of a bit of gore, a bit of aggression, but not quite on the over the top levels of Mortal Kombat. But it was all driven by combos. So it was all about stringing together combos and being able to sort of annihilate your opponent. So it was sort of frantic and full on, really good.
Button mashing, but strategic button
Yeah.
mashing.
Well, no, it was actually quite difficult to perform those combos. So that a lot of it was you had to know what special moves to string together to keep the combo flowing. So it became a bit of an art for those who could do it. I couldn't really do it, but I remember mine coming with the CD with the soundtrack, and I still have that somewhere in a box up in the loft. I'm sure it's buried somewhere.
Really?
Little cardboard sleeve, but I used to love listening to that because it had some really cool music. So I used to listen to that. Well, I say cool. It was cool to me. I've always been a massive geek. Um, but yeah, and there's just so many games on the Super Nintendo I could list. We've just touched on Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, arguably better on the Mega Drive, I guess, if you liked your characters to bleed and not sweat. But that was again a Super Nintendo being very cautious from a child's perspective. So yeah, I think that the Super Nintendo was probably the first console that I remember feeling like was truly mine. Like I said, I think it was a Christmas gift, and we had many, many games on that. I think we came to the Nintendo quite late in its life, so I don't think we had it. I mean, I was only 2 in 1985, so there's no way we had it at launch. So I think it was a case of we had the Nintendo late in life. We'd taken to it quite well, so we were bought the Super Nintendo reasonably early in its life.
Mm.
Um, so we had that for what felt like a lot longer, and had lots of games on it. So Super
Nice.
Nintendo was probably mine. So
I do
next question
actually.
for you, Robbie.
Before we go on to the next question, I do have to give an honorable mention to PC gaming, which I started very young as well. We had a PC in the house.
Okay, well you could have added that bullet point, and I'd because I also had some PC
Oh,
gaming
did
memories. Go
you?
on. I do.
I thought you were console or
Oh no,
die.
no.
Well, it was very early days, Windows 98 kind of gaming. So it was Doom, Unreal
Yeah,
Tournament, like the Game of the Year edition. And the one I always remember, because it was so difficult, was the original Prince of Persia, if you remember that one.
yes, yeah.
I even brought it up as an image. I prepped an image for that one because it just makes me shudder now because of how difficult it was.
Really was hard. The Prince of Persia remake on the PS2 though, banging game. Loved that.
Really?
I'm going to show you something very quickly because you just mentioned it. So this is book of reading at the moment. This is Cliff Bleszinski, the creator of a number of things, Gears of War being one of them, which we've been playing on stream,
Mm.
but also the developer for Unreal Tournament. So he was one of the key developers on Unreal. And his book called Control Freak talks all about his sort of journey, but it's covering the development of those games. And I didn't know the history of them, but it's really interesting. So if you were into those games as a kid, you might find that quite an interesting read, certainly the first bit.
Mm.
Anyway, maybe also useful or interesting as we get towards our Gears playthrough. So yes, believe it or not, I did have a PC as a child. I was very into my computers as a child. I had Windows 95, I think was my first machine. I had so I didn't really get into Doom. Wasn't I downloaded it. I had it. I played it, but it didn't really like it. Duke Nukem was another one. I think I only
Mm.
ever had the it would have been the demo or the trial, so you couldn't do very much. But you could go to the strip club. You could pay the dance stuff. You could go and have a whiz in the toilet, and you could blow some like pig men into chunks. So it was quite good fun. Descent. Don't know if you ever played Descent. That was like it was kind of like I don't know, spaceship kind of in tunnels, kind of full 3D, real like, kind of trippy game. But the games that really stuck out for me on PC, so I've always loved the RTS stuff. So Theme Park,
Yeah.
Theme Hospital, Command and Conquer. Had a number of Command and Conquer
Oh
games.
yeah.
Massively into those.
They brought them out
Uh,
again recently as well.
yeah, yeah, I tried them. I've been playing them because they're on Game Pass.
Yes. Yeah.
Much harder than I remember. Really hard.
Soundtrack though for that game is amazing. They
Tim
remastered the
Curry as well.
soundtrack. Is it?
Tim Curry's one of the video characters in the game. He's great, overacting and hammy.
Excellent.
To those, Football Manager was a massive game in our house. Me and my brother, and then my stepdad had got heavily into Football Manager, multiple versions over the years and years that we had our PCs. Um, Worms,
Oh, Worms. I forgot about
can't
that's the
forget
PS1
Worms.
game. I used to play a lot of that.
So we played it on PC, and I could never get used to it on consoles because it was just much easier to control your worm. My friend had Worms 1, and then I got Worms 2, where they had the big graphical uplift and they all got little cartoony
Mm.
characters, and I loved Worms. That got a lot of love. I had a random Ace Ventura point and click adventure, like based on the cartoon series. That was quite weird. Um, I had the Die Hard trilogy on PC
Oh
before I
wow.
bought it on console. Yeah,
Didn't know they were games, but there you go.
the Die Hard trilogy. You've never played the Die Hard trilogy?
No, as in Die Hard the film.
Yeah. So Die Hard, it's on PS1, and I've got it on Sega Saturn here randomly. But that's for another day. Um, Die Hard trilogy was effectively three different types of games in one. So you had Die Hard 1, 2, and 3. Die Hard 1 was a third person in Nakatomi Plaza, and you worked your way up the floors, clearing the bad guys, saving the hostages, and working your way up to the top. Don't think I ever saw the top. It's quite hard. Die Hard 2 played better with a light gun, but it was an on
This
rails
looks like
shooter.
a
Yeah,
light gun style time
yeah, it's
crisis
an on
almost.
rail shooter. And then through the airports, and then Die Hard 3 is a car game, which is all sort of third person in the car, trying to get from point to point to stop the bombs from going off. All three of those games were really hard, and I don't think I ever finished any of them. But I loved Die Hard as a kid, so Die Hard trilogy was a must for me. Um, but I played it predominantly on the Saturn. But I know I had it on the PC, although I don't remember it overly well being played on PC because I've still got the big box somewhere, knocking around. So yeah, I definitely had PC games as well. That's where I learned. I mean, no secret, we both work in IT. That's what we do. That's where I learned my trade, if you like, is it's all self-taught from having the PCs as a kid. And installing my scanner's ridiculous PCI card or whatever it was that had to go inside the box, and was really scary for my parents as I opened up my £2,000 PC because these things were crazy expensive back in the day, and my grandparents had bought it for us as to help us learn and whatever else. I used to do all sorts of crap to that machine. At one point, I was really into GoldenEye on the N64, and I pimped that thing out with all sorts of unnecessary like videos and backdrops, things that would play when the machine booted up. It took about 10 minutes to get booted because it would have to auto run all these things I dumped into it. I had to rebuild that machine several times. But you learn, don't you, by doing that? So
Yeah.
yeah, big into my PC gaming as a kid. Not the things that most people think of when they think of PC gaming. Like most people think keyboard and mouse and shooters, don't they, these days?
Yeah.
But back then it was the things that you couldn't do on a console that a PC enabled that I loved my PC for. It was those
The
those
RTS. Yeah.
strategy games. Yeah, nothing filled me with more joy than playing those kind of big world, building the worlds, Sim City, things like that. Battle for Middle Earth, a bit later in life, but not my teenage years. So yeah,
Nice.
honorable mention, but you weren't expecting that, were you? So there you go. So let's move forward a little bit in age then. I would assume. I'm assuming. To the first console and game. They might not have been bought together, so you can do two stories here. The first console and game that you bought with your own money. So it could have been birthday money, could have been hard earned on your paper round, could have been your weekend job. What was the first console and what was the first game that you bought with your own money, if you remember?
You guessed it. You guessed it already. My paper round. My hard-earned money on a paper round. I saved up. I must have been 13, 14 at the time. And I saved up for a Xbox 360. It's the first console I paid and owned for myself.
Nice.
I had a few consoles like leading up to that through my brother, had his own consoles and things like that. I used to play with him, like the original Xbox um, and others. But the first one that I bought with my own money was Xbox 360. And the game I always remember at that time, there was obviously quite a lot on the Xbox 360 that was really popular at the time, all the Call of Duties and things like that. The one I always played the most was Halo 3 on Xbox. It was my absolute favorite game. Just because I had so many friends that had an Xbox at the time, you would just play online for hours. You would rush home from school to play on the Xbox and try and beat your friends home. Yeah, loved it. Absolutely loved it.
I think it's a brilliant console and one that probably deserves its own episode at some point. Um, I I I had a 360. I was a little bit older than you, so I wasn't running home from school. I was getting home from work. I had my 360 in my 20s. I had it at launch because I'd been really keen to get a new PlayStation, but the PS3 had been announced at some ridiculous price, and there's loads of jokes about some of the awful comments that I don't know if you remember this. The PS3. Do you not remember?
I remember the
I'll
PS3 being way more
when
expensive.
when it came out, the I can't remember who from PlayStation was doing the announcement. They basically said that they encourage you to get a second job to pay for it because you were going to love it that much. So
Terrible
almost
marketing
acknowledging how
idea.
extortionately expensive it was. And it was the price was released. I'd never owned the original Xbox. I was a PS2 boy, PS2 all the way, and the PS3 was going to be a year further down the line, 100 or something pound more expensive. And I thought, no, I want to play new next gen games now. Like I'm missing out on the hype. So I bought a 360, and I think I had Ghost Recon with
Nice.
it. One of the few games that was out at the time. Played a lot of that. Again, like you mentioned, the online. Do have fond memories of Halo 3. It's probably the only Halo game I've ever really gotten into. I wasn't bothered by
Same.
1 and 2 because I didn't have access to them and wasn't really fussed. Um,
By the
I
time
played,
that you get onto Xbox 360 as well, they're almost classic games as well. They were more for the original Xbox.
yeah, yeah, and I played Halo 3. Played the campaign, loved it, and because I came into the campaign at the end of the trilogy,
Yeah.
kind of the stakes were really high by that point. So I remember the music, I remember some of the epic battles,
Mm.
really loved that. And then we played a lot of the multiplayer. I wasn't very good, but I really enjoyed just playing it with my friends. And actually, because we played so regularly together, we kind of got good by virtue of the fact that we just got used to each other's movements and what we did, and yeah, loved it. But like
There's another
massive
stream
memories
idea
of
if we want to delve into some classic Halo playing, campaign wise or even online. I'd be well up for
yeah,
it.
I haven't played the more recent ones either. I haven't played the Infinite campaign yet.
It's very
I
like
think
a Halo 3.
is it? I'd like to
Yeah.
play it, and I think it's now. Are they
Gameplay
launching
wise.
co-op? I think co-op is
I
coming
think
if it
so.
hasn't been launched yet. Yeah,
Uh,
we should play that co-op. I've not played Infinite unless you've
yeah.
played it.
I
Yeah.
haven't.
So 360. I mean, that's a hard one to beat. But I think I can.
Go for it.
I'm joking. It's not a game. My first console with my own money was the PlayStation 2.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it was my 18th birthday. It was predominantly birthday money, and some part-time job money. I used to work at Woolworths, so that's aging me instantly. And the PS2 was my first console, and I remember being so excited for that thing. The PS2 didn't feel like a typical games console. I mean, you look back at it now, the leap in even just the aesthetic from the PS1, which did look very kind of boxy console-y, to the PS2, which was even now looks slick, looks cool. Um, I bought the PS2. I was super excited for the games. I'd seen a trailer for the new Metal Gear Solid, and I was massive. I am massive into the Metal Gear Solid series. MGS1 blew my mind on the PlayStation. MGS2 just took it to the next level. But they didn't release that for a couple of years after. But I had the PS2. I bought it for the games, but I also bought it, and I was super excited about DVD. And because I've been working at Woolworths, I've been seeing early DVD players kind of running in store playing things like The Matrix, which one of the first, I think one of the first DVDs you could buy.
Mm.
And just remember thinking how amazing it looked on DVD, and but desperately wanting one. But they were like £300 or £400 for a DVD player back then,
Mm.
and the PS2 was cheaper than that, and it was a games console and a DVD player. So the PS2 was my choice. I can tell you, not only can I tell you what I had, I can tell you which games and which DVD I bought from Woolworths. 'Cause I got it all from where I work, 'cause I got a discount. I got Sniper Scope, which is it's not that great actually, to be honest, but it's a sniper game that you played with a controller. They didn't do a gun for it. There's one on your screen now for those watching the video, but that was for the Xbox, and not didn't do as advertised either. It was really not necessary. But Sniper Scope, I had International Superstar Soccer before it became Pro Evolution Soccer,
Oh yeah.
and I had and the best one of the three that I bought was SSX,
Ah, I
which
love SSX.
yeah had been highly reviewed. That ended up being a game series that I loved, absolutely loved that up until 3, and then the games after 3 weren't that great, but up until 3. But SSX1 blew my mind. Loved that game. I also have fond memories of things like Tekken Tag Tournament. Played that to death with one of my friends who had that, and we got to the point where we'd have almost 20-minute long fights. We turned the time limit off because we just knew each other's moves. We couldn't hit each other.
Yeah.
It was like block, jump, block, jump, block, jump, block, jump. It was just constant. Love that. And then I remember, this is really sad and plays into my love of Metal Gear. There was a game called Zone of the Enders, which was directed by Hideo Kojima, who did the Metal Gear series. And Zone of the Enders 1, the only reason I bought it is it came bundled with a playable demo for Metal Gear Solid 2. And for fans of Metal Gear Solid 2, you'll know that there was a bit of a switcheroo played very early in the game when you thought you were going to be playing as Solid Snake for the game, and then they pivot. Spoiler. But it's well old now. They pivot and they change you to another character, and you end up playing alongside Solid Snake. And everyone loved Solid Snake. He was the protagonist. He was the hero. In the demo and in the start of the game, which is the only bit you got in the demo, it's you play a Solid Snake on a tanker, and you have to clear the guards out and sort of make your way through the different areas. And I must have put more hours into that demo than I did most of the games I owned on that PS2. I would play it over and over and over and over, just to try and find all the little exploits, all the little things, the little Easter eggs. The way you could, it was just so revolutionary at the time. It wouldn't stand up. It was playable now, but it wouldn't stand up now. You wouldn't really understand it now. But playing it then just blew my mind. So the PS2 would be the first console I bought. Now, you didn't cover your first game, Robbie, or did you bundle them? Did you not buy a game for a console that
I think my
your
first
brother owned
game.
or somebody else
I think my first game was Halo 3.
that you bought yourself?
I think
So
so. Yeah. I think I got them at the same time because it was. I think it was the reason I bought it was because I had a few friends who already had the console, and I'd played.
Right.
I'd been over theirs, and I'd played Halo with them. And I was like, I'm dying to get it to play online. So I think I bought it, and I bought Halo 3 at the time. Yeah. So that was my first game as well.
So mine was separate. So I know I don't know that this was my absolute first game, because I'm sure I must have bought something at some point with birthday money or something on the SNES. But I
Was it
remember
there?
buying.
Yeah. Oh, good point.
Yeah, but my first memory of going to a video game store and buying something with my own money, because I think games I had before would have been birthday money, things like that, which is still my money, but I get, it's gifted. But with my money that I had earned, I remember going to, there was I'm going to call it like an independent video game store. It wasn't a brand, it wasn't a chain, and it was in Birmingham city centre, and it was kind of tucked under this subway. It was kind of like, proper. It was a bit like CEX is now, but
Yeah.
before CEX was kind of the kind of overpriced chain that it is. And I was in there, and they'd got a game on the N64 that I'd not seen before, and it was called WCW versus the World. Now, I was massively into my WWF. Didn't know much about WCW, but there wasn't a good WWF game on the N64.
Mm.
I saw this game, and I was like, "Ooh, what's that?" And I'd never heard of it, never seen it. Bought it, played it with some friends, absolutely loved it. It's a series of wrestling games that are still held up by wrestling fans as probably being the best wrestling games ever made. There've been more advances since, but in terms of just that balance of playability and sort of fun and whatever. But there was a series of them in the end. So WCW versus the World was the first one. They then did WCW versus NWO Revenge, and then the license holders switched to WWF because they'd made some really good games that had got popular, and WWF went, "Hang on, we like some of that." So they paid the developers, and they pivoted and they did WrestleMania, and then the sort of pinnacle was No Mercy, which was the last game that they did, and then they changed tact and started doing different styles again. I've still got those games, all of them. My original WCW versus the World, um, and I'm. It's one of those memories that I will always have because I just remember being in that store, being surrounded by all these games, a lot of which you just didn't see. A lot of the N64, wasn't well stocked in a lot of shops, not where I lived anyway. So to see this wrestling game and buy it, probably paid over the odds, I think, at the time because it was quite pricey. But yeah, me and my friends played that to death, and the subsequent games that followed became a staple of my time at senior school. We would go back to my friend at lunchtime. We'd grab one of the multicolored N64 pads, and I looked over my shoulder because he recently donated a couple to my collection. I think they're on the
Nice.
side. I was going to try and grab it, but it's just out of reach. And we'd grab one of those multicolored controllers, and we would sit and play N64 all through lunch. But I'll touch on that in a minute when we talk about the next bullet.
Nice.
So, yeah. So now that I've said that, does that ring any bells for you? Is there a game that you can remember buying before Halo 3?
I'm struggling to remember, to be honest, any other games that I might have bought. There will have been some, none that really stick out immediately. The ones I remember is buying it with that console, the Xbox 360.
Well, you bought
I think I
well,
bought,
to be honest.
yeah.
Yeah, you made the right choice if you're buying your 360. Buying Halo 3 is a pretty good a good first game
First
purchase, isn't
game.
it? It could have been
Yeah.
worse. It could have been what was the one that the spiritual sequel to GoldenEye that then got a sequel on the Xbox
Oh, I think I played that one as well.
and it launched. Oh God, people will be screaming at it on the podcast. What was it called?
But it's named after the film, isn't it? One of the films.
No, no, no. The spiritual sequel wasn't a Bond game. It was Perfect Dark. There we go.
Perfect
I got there
Dark.
in the end. So Perfect Dark used the same game engine as the N64's GoldenEye, and then on the Xbox they had they took Microsoft bought Rare, which is the studio behind it, and they got them to make a sequel on the Xbox, but it wasn't the same engine. It was different mechanics. It frankly wasn't very good. It was okay. It wasn't terrible, but it was one of those games those launch games that just kind of got forgotten about. So Perfect Dark, it might have been Perfect Dark Zero, I think it might have been called. And interestingly, we are awaiting a sequel to Perfect Dark because Microsoft put together what they're calling a quadruple A studio. Because normally video games, big video
Yeah,
games,
yeah.
big video game studios are triple A, quadruple A, and that quadruple A studio have announced they're doing a Perfect Dark a new Perfect Dark game. So we'll see where that goes. But many,
Fun.
many, many years after the last one. So yeah, but I think you picked well with Halo 3. So good choice. That then brings us on to, by this point, and I think maybe these were your teenage years by the description you've just given and your paper round, but maybe as we pushed in towards those late teen years, what were your teenage years like when it came to gaming? What was going on in your world in that time?
Well, so online gameplay was a big thing around my teenage years. So it was all getting home as early as possible to play online with your friends. And at the time, it was the likes of Call of Duty. So Modern Warfare 2 was a really, really popular game at the time for me and my friends. We spent so many hours playing on that game. But then there was also Call of Duty Zombies. Was a really big thing as well. I played a lot with my friends. We'd just play hours over and over again, just trying to survive killing these zombies. But it was very much online gameplay, and also playing with my brother quite a bit as well. But yeah, it was the Call of Duties, the Halos. I'm struggling to remember anything else. I think we just obsessed over those games when I was a kid, when I was a teenager.
A lot of time spent on shooters.
Yeah, yeah, actually.
I mean, Call of Duty and the 360 were synonymous, weren't they? I mean, Call of Duty at its peak. I know it's still a huge, huge franchise now, but that was its heyday, wasn't it? It was breaking records every year on the 360. I didn't play every iteration. I was big into Modern Warfare and Modern Warfare 2.
Mm.
I didn't mind. I didn't really get into the period, well, not the period ones. The dated ones
The
that were
World at War.
between the World War. Yeah, I was never really into that. And then I kind of fell off of Modern Warfare 3. Just I think I reached a point where I was just getting a little bit tired of it, and I was also struggling to find the time. With Modern Warfare 1 and 2, as you said, 2 specifically,
Amazing.
you could log on every evening, and I must have had like 8 or 9 mates who would consistently be on. You could
Yeah.
always get into a game, and it was, yeah, you'd always have people to play with and people to talk to, and it was brilliant.
It's funny looking back, isn't it? Because it's hard to tell whether the game itself was amazing or just the fact that everyone you knew was playing it. So you always had someone to play with for
I
hours.
think it's I think it's probably a bit of both. I think at the time it was a breakthrough game, wasn't it? It was just something special, but because there was everybody on it, like you said, you've got those memories. It's like I was saying to you recently through lockdown, friends and I played a lot of Warzone, Call of Duty Warzone. I dropped off it now, lost interest, but for good 6 to 12 months, it was like being kids again. We were on every other night,
Yeah.
or every night in some instances, and that was because the pandemic. I guess one of the positive things that the pandemic did, I guess, was it slowed life down a little bit, and we had more time. We weren't able to go out. We weren't able to do anything. And we've all got kids now, so we were kind of all sort of housebound. The evening we'd roll around and we'd just jump on Warzone. We were all there together. We could all play together, and it was like being kids again. It was those memories you make
Yeah.
playing with a squad every night, which was fantastic. I realised as you were answering these questions, Robbie, that the next bullet
I
point may
know.
also be exactly the same answer that you've given to the previous two. So I apologise because there's a bit of a distance. Whereas for me, these answers are a little bit different because of what was around at the time. So
Mm.
um, I'll give you my teenage years then. So PS2, bit of GameCube, but right to the end, because I said I was 18 when I bought my PS2.
Yeah.
Um, so I was more N64 through, I guess, my later school years, as I was just talking about with the wrestling. Um, and there were a handful of games that come to mind when I think of that console. The wrestling certainly are up there. GoldenEye, of course, is
Mm.
another one, which was an absolute classic. Although I haven't had a chance to try the recently released remaster,
Ooh.
but I've heard it's a little bit disappointing. Um, lazy is one of the words that's been used to describe it, I
Oh,
think.
that's not a
Yeah, and
not what you
the
want to hear.
controls haven't been mapped very well. The Xbox version, for some reason, has tweaked the tune ever so slightly by removing this kind of bong or a gong noise in there. You don't notice it when you first listen to it, and you just know something's not quite right. And then when you hear the original, you go, "Oh my god, why did they remove that? What a weird thing to take out." So there's a few things like that I'm not bothered about the remaster, but GoldenEye on the N64. Oh my god, the hours that my friends and I would have sunk into that. And it was on rotation really. So the wrestling game would get a look in. That was a few of our favourite. Then GoldenEye would go in, and it would be split screen multiplayer, 4 players. Then Mario Kart 64 would go in. That got a lot of time as well.
Yeah.
Probably my favourite Mario Kart.
Really?
Um, and I'm not because it's the best. Probably again because of the moment in
Nostalgia.
time. So
Yeah.
the Super Nintendo version was great. The N64 game played better because it was 3D, but also I just have such fond memories of the N64. Um, and then Lilac Wars, which for any overseas viewers or US specifically, is better known as Star Fox 64, but in European territories, it was Lilac Wars.
Lilac Wars.
Those are the games that I played with friends every lunchtime and every weekend, 4 players, and it was just, I don't know, it was just that time. It just captured us, and for the few years that we were all together at school, it just had us, and it was by far my most beloved console. I had a PS1, um, which I played more solo stuff on, so it was probably the first and the only real time I've properly got into things like Gran Turismo. Not really a big
Mm.
driving game fan, but really got into GT2. Final Fantasy on the PlayStation 1, so Final
That's
Fantasy
a
7.
whole world I've never delved into is Final Fantasy.
Final Fantasy 7 and Final Fantasy 8. I was particularly a big fan of 8, although I know a lot of people aren't. Metal Gear Solid, obviously that was another classic on the PlayStation. But because the PS1 was kind of an afterthought, we had that later in the generation. I was buying all those games I just mentioned were all platinum by the time I got into them. But yeah, the PS1 was big, but the N64 will always be the one that through my school years I adored. and I remember seeing it for the first time. It was Mario 64, and my friend had bought one, and we were all into, I think, whatever we were playing at the time. And he brought his into school. His dad was the IT teacher,
Yeah.
and he hooked it up on the TV in the IT room, and he was trying to record it onto cassette. I don't know why. He'd set it up so you could record the play onto a cassette, which makes it sound really old.
Early streaming, see? Way ahead of his
Yeah,
time.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I remember watching him. He was taking on Bowser in one of the early levels where you fight Bowser and you had to grab Bowser by the tail and then use the analog stick to spin him around. I just remember being completely enamored with this 3D world that Mario was now running around in, and just like I still have real nostalgia for the very first level in Mario 64,
Yeah.
which is I don't know what the title of it is, Bomb something. But you have to make your way up. It's really simple. I mean, you look at it now; it's so short and so basic. But at the time, it was mind blowing. It's the one where the balls roll down the mountain,
Oh, okay, yeah.
and you have to dodge them as they come down. And I just remember thinking, "Wow!" I feel like that's so cool. I'm having to dynamically dodge these things and then leap over these gaps. Just it was next level for me. That was, and so yeah, for me, the teenage years were completely dominated by Nintendo 64 and a smattering of PlayStation. And then as we moved to the back end of my teens, 18, 19, PS2, eventually the GameCube, some really good games on the GameCube. I think I missed most of them because the sort of more kid-friendly nature of Nintendo at the time wasn't really what 19, 20-year-old me was looking for.
Yeah.
I
I
was
always found that a bit with Nintendo, as they seem to be pitching a bit younger.
Yeah, but now I appreciate that and I like the balance, and I actually quite like a lot of the Nintendo
Yeah.
classics, and the kids obviously enjoy them as well. But they kind of passed me by a bit on the GameCube, with the exception, excuse me. Oh, how unprofessional sneezing on a podcast. But yeah, the only exception to that was Smash Brothers Melee on the GameCube, but
Oh,
I
I
think I might have
loved
been in
Smash
my
Brothers.
20s by that point. Yeah, so I don't think that really counts. So my last question was going to be for you, Robbie, your first online multiplayer experience, but I think
Yeah.
we've covered that now.
Well, it's funny
Um,
actually because that wasn't my first online play.
okay, go on, take me back. Is this PC?
No, actually. Well, I'm trying to
No.
think. Maybe no, no, no. I don't think I did do online. No, couldn't do dial-up gameplay. I'm sure it was more. I remember my brother and his friends used to play on the original Xbox, and I think it was like Halo 1, Halo 2, those kind of games.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that had. I remember playing remotely with them. Um,
Yeah,
online.
these
I remember
were
it blew my mind at the time.
yeah, it was Xbox who forged ahead, didn't they? They built the network port into the Xbox,
Yeah,
and yeah, their Xbox Live was born on the original Xbox.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So
So
what
that
you
was
you
my
were playing Halo then on?
Halo 1 and 2, yeah, with my brother and his friends, his college friends at the time. And I'd still remember just my mind being blown that I was able to play with people that weren't in the room.
Yeah, I
um,
can imagine. I mean, I didn't have the original Xbox. I've got one now. I bought it recently,
yeah.
just to sort of as part of my weird collection I built. But I never had one. But a friend of mine did, and he loved Halo. I would go over and play it, and I was like, I don't really get it. But he was super into it, and he was playing it online, and
Yeah,
yeah, having online parties with his mates, and he loved it.
yeah. Well, the
Yeah, so
second one, they introduced the sword. That's when it got really interesting.
yes,
They didn't have it in
yeah.
the first one.
I mean, in a way, I wish I'd had that experience, because I hear so many people talk about how Halo was just like transformative from an online multiplayer perspective. It wasn't mine, although my first online experience was a good one. So, mine was PS2.
Mm.
So I had the PS2 network adapter. It's still attached to my original PS2, and I still have it now. And it was this
Hey.
big chunky block that got plugged on the back, and you had to have a disc you put in to set it all up. And there were very few games that supported it, certainly initially. So the first game I experienced on it was called SOCOM US Navy SEALs. And SOCOM US Navy SEALs was, as the title suggests, it was a Navy SEAL game, but it came with a headset as well.
Wow.
And the headset allowed you. So the headset was obviously required for online play,
Yeah.
but it was also incorporated into the solo game, because you could use the headset to give audio instructions to your teammates. So
What?
you could tell them to like clear a room, frag out, things like that. which I didn't feel comfortable doing. I'll be honest. Sat in my room, I felt a little bit awkward doing that, just talking to my TV. Nowadays, we probably wouldn't think anything of it because we've all got smart speakers and whatever else. Um, but yeah, so SOCOM was the first game. I didn't really play it heavily online, to be honest. Um, where my proper online experience came from, and I have very fond memories of this, and I can't remember, well, I should have checked this first, which of the two games it was that came first, but it was the Splinter Cell series, and it was either Chaos Theory or Pandora Tomorrow. I played them both, and I can't remember which one was the first I played online. But either way, I played them both heavily. They had a game mode, if you've ever played it, called Spies versus Mercs.
I haven't.
You haven't? Oh, it was brilliant. So, as the spies, you played in the third person as sort of Sam Fisher clones. So you could sort of climb into vents, you could like hide, stealth. You'd pick your loadout before you went into the game. The Mercs played first person, like a first person shooter. They too had a selection of loadouts and things like torches and stuff to try and find the spies. The spies had an infiltration mission, so they could either infiltrate, do the mission and get out, or they could blindside the Mercs and kill them. And the Mercs' sole job was to defend the area and to kill the spies if they found them. So the spies, the Mercs were slightly overpowered in that respect. And me and my friend played that together, and then we met a couple of guys online who basically introduced us to like a clan at the time, and I'd never been in a clan before.
Yeah.
And they were called the Blood of Angels. So
Oh,
cool.
the
And our
corniest
tag,
names come out of
I know,
clans.
yeah, I know. And our tag was Boa, so you had to have your gamer tag everywhere. And but they were really good lads, and we played lots of Chaos Theory together. We all moved on to Battlefield when that came out on the PS2, and we played hours of the Battlefield when that came onto PlayStation. And we went on, and we have been and carried on playing ever since. I've never met them. I only really have sort of stay in touch with one of them now, and we play sparingly. But every so often, we will fall into a game like one of the new Battlefields, or we played a bit of Call of Duty together as well. And it was they were the first kind of people I ever met online, and to this day, the only people that I've ever met online that I have sort of struck any kind of a friendship up with that I've then never gone on to meet. So I've still never. I know what they look like. We had Facebook and things like that afterwards.
Yeah.
But we've never met in person. But we've played, many, many hours over the many generations that have followed together. So my first online experience was Splinter Cell, and I loved it for that reason. So
Yeah, I remember having a PS2 Slim, and it had an Ethernet port at the back of it, but I just don't remember any games at the time that supported it, so I never got to play it online.
there were very few. That would have been noteworthy. The Battlefield series, obviously Splinter Cell, as I've mentioned. SOCOM had a number of sequels. And there must have been others, but not that I particularly remember,
Yeah.
or that I played. I'll tell you a periphery I do remember on the PlayStation 2. Do you remember the iToy?
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
That was a weird gadget. I had one of those. I had all the camera things. I had one on the PS3 as well. That's for
I
another
always
day.
remember the ninja one where you had like little
Yes,
characters that come in to fight you, and you had to like karate chop them away from attacking you.
with the window cleaning one where you had to scrub the bubbles off the windows.
Yeah.
Novelty, but lots of fun. I like those kind of motion games. I know they're not like hardcore gamers thing, but
Yeah.
there's a number of those. I've still got recently as part of my nerdy retro setup. I've got the original Kinect, the PS4 and the Move ones. I've got a PS3 camera somewhere, but it's not set up. I might pick up an iToy one day just for the fun of being able to play those games again because they're just fun. They were just good fun. Yeah. But yeah, so that was my first online multiplayer experience.
Nice.
So I feel like we could cover a whole load of ground, and there's still so much we haven't talked about from a console perspective. But hopefully that's been useful.
It's been a nice overview, I think. If there's anything that we want to dive into later and have a bit more of a deep dive, we can. We've covered a lot of kind of surface ground here.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think hopefully sort of set the context for the age gap. The reason we call the podcast Generations Apart, and some of the conversations we'll have in the future, it won't all be gaming related. We will reflect on technology generations. We touched a little bit on PCs when we were young, and it'd be really funny to compare some of our PC hardware memories and what if you can remember what your first processor was. Don't do it now. But yeah, so and we'll definitely touch on the games some more. I'd love to get into a bit more of the memories on some of the games and the nostalgia around them, because genuinely I think it's that games now are great. You can't argue that there's some fantastic stuff out there for anyone who wants to get into gaming, but there's just something about the way the old stuff was designed, the lack of awareness of the size of the industry or what the industry would go on to become meant that the sort of more commercial nature that you see around free to play models and these kind of seasonal passes and there's a lot of kind of I don't know I'm going to call it underhand because it's not underhand but processes and methods at play that I don't particularly like that I think now are spoiling games a little bit.
Yeah.
Games are designed to last too long. They're not designed to be sort of a moment in time, story driven experience that you can replay and replay. They want you to just play them every night. And that rules people like me out. I haven't got the time for that anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas the older games didn't do that, as much. And there's just something a little bit more innocent, I think, about maybe that's naivety and nostalgia talking as well, but there's just something a little about some of those classics. Don't get me wrong, a lot of it does not replay well, but some of it,
Yeah.
some of it's as good now as it ever was. I'll leave you with one more story. I went to a place called NQ64, which is a bar in Birmingham in Digbeth recently with my other half, and it's like a retro arcade and video console bar. It's
Yeah.
all painted and neons, and it's really cool. And they've got lots of like video game themed cocktails, and you can get yourself a Bulbasaur, which I quite
Nice.
like. I was at one of them. And they had some retro arcade machines and some retro consoles. And me and my other half sat down with our first drink around a GameCube, fired up Double Dash, Mario Kart Double Dash, and played 2 or 3 Grand Prix on that. And I said to him at one point, I said, "We've paid to come here and do this.
You got it all.
We could have got a bottle of wine and gone and sat in the office. And it's not the point. We had a great night out. But the point was that game still held up. We could sit and play that. Didn't matter that it was at this point, 15, 20 years old.
Yeah.
It played just as well. And I think there's a lot of those old games that still do. The hardware is still pretty resilient if you get the right ones and you can find good ones. I'm struggling with my NES, but everything else is working well. So yeah, I think there's something to be said for those old games.
Yeah.
I hope my kids will appreciate them when they're old enough to play them properly.
Yeah. Keep your collection pristine.
Absolutely. Robbie, I've got no idea how we're doing for time.
We're pretty up against the hour. So
Perfect. Well, we've run out of bullet points, Robbie, so we can.
It was
we can
good
wrap
timing.
the episode there. We've done that well, and we always try and aim for an hour. Before we do our outro, I would like to say if you want to share your thoughts, if you're watching this on YouTube, it's probably easier to do it there. Or if you've listened to this on the podcast but want to go and share your thoughts, hop over to YouTube. You can find us at Jay and Robbie, and let us know some of your thoughts. What was your first gaming memory? What was your first console? What did you buy with your own money? What did you play when you were in your teenage years? If you're not still in them now, and what was your first online multiplayer experience? We'd love to hear and read those comments. So please do pop along and drop those down below. But that's it for this episode. So thank you for sticking with us through to the bitter end. Don't forget to subscribe, as we mentioned, on YouTube. You can find us on all try again. You can find us on all good podcast services, Robbie. So you don't miss an episode. And you can check us out on Twitch at Jay and Robbie, where we stream 3 times a week and try and play a variety of games. Our last stream was a fortnight, which was a very relaxed Sunday evening for the both of us. You can find us 2 or 3 nights a week over on Twitch as well. Otherwise, though, Robbie, it's been fun talking to you about your nostalgia for video games. I'm sure we'll get into it again. But that is all for this time. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thank you.